The death of her sister left Ruth Bellamy disillusioned. She eventually lost interest in Byzantine culture and spent more and more time alone with her memories of Belinda. She only emerged out of isolation to speak out against the lifetime employment program. Her opinions earned the contempt of the elite. She was last seen departing from Byzantium in a private craft. No one has heard from her since. With the dissolution of the board, Ruth Bellamy found herself without the two constants in her life: Byzantine culture and her sister Belinda. In the face of this new reality, she struggled to find a direction for her life. The colony had moved on from Halcyon Helen and would require new heroes in the years to come. And so Ruth Bellamy decided it was time to exit stage left. She quietly disappeared from public view. Ruth Bellamy never forgot the words you said to her. Rather than despairing over the death of her sister, she found the courage to make good use of her life. As a response to the lifetime employment program, she began writing and starring in her own serials. These were filled with subversive ideas critical of board authority. In retribution, Akande confiscated her estate and banned her serials. Bellamy declared that she had no regrets. Ruth Bellamy never forgot the words you said to her. She coped with Belinda's death by committing to live in a way that would make her sister proud. When the remnants of the colony banded together, Ruth Bellamy was there to help. She devoted her remaining years and resources to saving the colony. Years later, when the worst of the crisis had passed, Aetherways returned to Halcyon's culture. An aging Ruth Bellamy tried her hand at directing. Her first Aetherwave drama was dedicated to the memory of Belinda Bellamy and to her old friend, Captain of the Unreliable. The lifetime employment program led to a boom in the Aetherwave industry, as more and more Byzantines demanded entertainment. With the absence of Ruth Bellamy, the question on everyone's mind was, who could be the next Halcyon Helen? As the man accused of murdering Halcyon Helen, Spencer Woolrich enjoyed a brief brush with notoriety. This newfound reputation made him popular, and he eventually filled the shoes of his old rival. The lifetime employment program led to a boom in the Aetherwave industry, as more and more Byzantines demanded entertainment. With the absence of Ruth Bellamy, the question on everyone's mind was, who could be the next Halcyon Helen? Burbage 3001's performance during the investigation on Eridanos made it the ideal contender for Helen's replacement. Some years later, after Odeon Pictures released the brand-new Burbage 3002 model, it was found mysteriously destroyed by a plasma weapon. The lifetime employment program led to a boom in the Aetherwave industry, as more and more Byzantines demanded entertainment. With the absence of Ruth Bellamy, the question on everyone's mind was, who could be the next Halcyon Helen? The role went to the last remaining, and therefore best, candidate, Maverick Johnston's latest star, the Captain of the Unreliable, the savior of Halcyon. With the board's newly renewed grip on its seat of power, the public's increased interest in the Aetherwave industry, and the death of his primary acting rival, Spencer Woolrich expected to return to the limelight, as he so rightfully deserved. Much to his chagrin, however, his roles remained few, and quickly grew fewer. As his fall from stardom solidified, Woolrich found himself reassigned to menial labor and placed in suspended animation to support the lifetime employment program. It seemed that as much as he had resented her, Halcyon Helen had been all that separated Spencer from complete irrelevancy. As the board began to disintegrate, Spencer Woolrich found himself at a crossroads. Cling to what little stardom remained to him, or help usher Halcyon into its new future. To the surprise of many, perhaps himself most of all, Spencer chose the latter option. Having learned a variety of different skills in the many different roles played throughout his lengthy career, Spencer founded a radio serial dedicated to staying alive despite the odds. His subjects included how to survive violent encounters with only grazing wounds, dispense pithy one-liners for tense scenarios, and, of course, how to look good doing both. After Spectrum Brown's widespread distribution, Spencer Woolrich experienced a sudden upswing in his popularity. Viewers found his on-screen conduct to be more boisterous, energetic, and personable than ever before. The wide grin constantly beaming from his narrow face certainly helped fit his friendly image. When asked about his newfound on-screen charisma, Spencer had this to say: "Happy workers lead to happy customers. Happy customers are repeat customers." With the situation in Eridanos taken care of, and with Byzantium's sphere of influence rapidly expanding, attention on the Prophet of Profitability's productivity seminars multiplied 100-fold. High-rungers all over Halcyon flocked to Eridanos and its newly opened Productivity Expansion Reserve. The Prophet herself remained at the forefront of her discipline, until a violent encounter with a rival spy, actually no more than a curious fan, saw her fade into the background for the remainder of her days. Due to the board's dissolution, many of the Prophet's old customers no longer found quite the same value in productivity seminars that they once had. With her business drying up, the Prophet chose to take her followers down a new path. Months later, salvagers on Eridanos found clues leading them to a seemingly abandoned bunker out in the wilderness. Inside, they discovered horribly mangled corpses, sacrificed to a blood-scrawled portrait of a sprat-headed deity. The Prophet was not among the bodies. The Prophet of Profitability was not spared from the infection quickly overtaking Eridanos. Due to her newfound chronic delight, the Prophet was no longer able to effectively advise her clients on productivity. Her disciples, similarly bliss-enwrapped, lost interest in the hot coal walks and hourly purges. Despite all this, the Prophet's spirits were hardly dampened. After all, she no longer had the capacity to worry about any of her business rivals. Cedric Kincannon quietly disappeared in the aftermath of the Eridanos incident. As unlikely as it would be for Cedric to have slipped off-world before the infection claimed Eridanos, no one has ever seen him among the waves of madly grinning infected plaguing the colony. Curiously, no one has ever seen Cedric's former secretary, Eileen, among the infected either. The dissolution of the board did not mean the dissolution of the ambitions of Cedric Kincannon, the charismatic leader of Sublight Underground. Cedric offered slugs transportation services to the newly thawed colonists, and set to work ferrying resources and food wherever they were most needed. For better or worse, slug headgear became fashionable in the following years. Cedric Kincannon did not take kindly to losing the vast majority of his subordinates to hibernation. Despite the board seriously entertaining the idea of offering Sublight a seat, Cedric was nowhere to be found. Any theories that he left Halcyon entirely to begin a new life on some undiscovered asteroid with his former secretary Eileen are, of course, just theories. Bertie Holcomb adapted to his new role as a host for parasitic slugs surprisingly well. Perhaps because he wasn't using his brain for all that much in the first place. The slugs put a swift, if unorthodox, end to Bertie's fears of being valued solely for his tossball skills. Of all the infected in the colony, Bertie's wild, beaming smile would always be the most genuine. After a brief attempt at dating Helen as one person rather than two, which both Bertie and Helen found too strange, Bertie struck out on his own to try his hand at raising woolly cows. Many of his former Rangers teammates soon followed, accompanied by the woolly cow the team had originally plied with alcohol. The dairy farm thrived under Bertie's leadership and care. The dairy rangers privately believed that the woolly cows softened Bertie's temper considerably, although the only one brave enough to say this to his face was promptly headbutted. Tossball in Halcyon changed dramatically after the Lifetime Improvement Program. With roughly half of the league's players in hibernation, existing teams were forced to merge. The upheaval caused a great deal of infighting between longtime rivals, who found themselves on the same side of the tossball hump. This, in turn, led to a pronounced increase of knives during play, and a period in tossball's history known as the blood loss across the toss. Bertie Holcomb groused in private about the general fictation of tossball spectators. Once, enraged by the sight of a Byzantine seated in the front row with a fancy drink, Bertie leapt over the dividing wall to the stands, seized the offending beverage, and stabbed the man in the hand with its tiny umbrella garnish. New laws against this infraction were created after the game. Bertie Holcomb would live forever in the annals of tossball history as the first player to have received a penalty for audience participation. The Rizzo's company in Halcyon dissolved after the collapse of the board. Needless to say, the launch of Spectrum Brown was indefinitely delayed. A stockpile of Spectrum Brown remains buried deep beneath the ruins of the old distillery, abandoned to time and attrition. The truth about Rizzo's Spectrum Brown was buried in the abandoned ruins of their old distillery. The company designed a new drink using the rancid harvests from the old purpleberry orchards and a dangerous amount of brown food coloring. This second launch of Spectrum Brown was sold in Byzantium at an exorbitant price. It was incredibly popular. The Rizzo's company in Halcyon dissolved after the collapse of the board. The Eridanos atmospheric complex developed a notorious reputation as a derelict settlement populated by grinning killers. These stories kept the infection safely contained, until a group of salvagers braved the complex and stole 20 crates of Spectrum Brown. Inside these crates, long-dormant parasites began to stir. Administrator Ludovico never lived to see the launch of Spectrum Brown. It happened in a private event in Byzantium to an elite gathering of dilettantes who wanted to sample the drink that killed Halcyon Helen. Spectrum Brown was briefly popular in the months following the Lifetime Employment Program, but fell out of favor once Byzantines realized it couldn't dull the inevitable onset of ennui. In the absence of board regulation, Spectrum Brown made its way across the colony by passing hands between the desperate, the apathetic, and the lonely. A few settlements tried, and failed, to ban Spectrum Brown. The drink became a dangerous escape for anyone who dreamed of happier days. The Hope scientists subjected the Eridanos parasite to intense research. Within a few years, they had successfully neutralized its most dangerous side effects. Spectrum Brown users could be identified by their permanent grins, but no longer experienced violent urges. The sheer volume of substances consumed by the average Byzantine had the effect of countering the parasite's influence. Hosts to the parasite rarely turned violent, and the few who did were discreetly rounded up and deposited outside the walls.